Welcome to the Liberty Insider. This is a program bringing you news, analysis, and up-to-date information on religious liberty events in the United States and around the world. My name is Lincoln Steed, editor of Liberty Magazine, and my guest on the program is attorney Allen Reinach, executive director of the Church-State Council.
Always glad to be with you,
past guest, and we often work together. And I know some of what you're going to say, but our viewers don't, so let's get into it.
Good friends besides.
Absolutely. We might test it today on this program. No, but you know, we have slightly different takes on a very important topic.
Sure.
Not really takes on it, but tactics perhaps. I think most people, even those that don't follow religious liberty closely, that don't listen to the news too much, noticed fairly recently when the Supreme Court brought in, at the same time, decisions on two, I'd say, landmark cases that relate to gay marriage.
Right.
There was the Defense of Marriage Act repudiation.
Otherwise known as Doma.
And then one where they really knocked back a case, but the implications of that are quite
involving California's Proposition 8.
They denied standing, really, to those that had brought in Proposition 8 in California, which was a proposition designed to head off gay marriage in California.
Right. So, you know, there's been a lot of concern about the future of religious freedom in light of these cases and what impact it will have on the churches. And so I think it's well for us to take some time to talk about them. But first, I thought it would be good just to give some synopsis of what the court actually said and did. Okay? So the Doma case, you have, back in 1995, Congress passes an act to define the scope of federal benefits and how the federal government treats marriage for all kinds of purposes, everything from immigration to tax code, you name it.
This was under
Clinton. Clinton signs into law the Defense of Marriage Act that does something that was very unremarkable. It says marriage is a man and a woman, which it has always been throughout history, throughout all civilizations. It's not limited to any particular religion. Marriage is a man and a woman. The Supreme Court hears a case involving a woman who was married in Canada, resident in New York. Her spouse dies, and she's subjected to estate taxation as though she were not married, because her marriage is not recognized under federal law. And she sues for, to be treated to the estate tax benefit of marriage, and the court rules in her favor. But it's interesting how it did so. It essentially said two things. Number one, that marriage is first and foremost the province of the states. It's a function of state law, and the federal government had no business getting into it in the first place, which is false, because all the federal government was doing was defining how it's going to regard marriage for purposes of its own programs.
Yeah, I mean, it's true on most things except interstate commerce and other national issues. The federal government really has to leave it to state prerogatives, even after the Civil War, which changed that dynamic a little.
But the second thing that the court did was it justified its decision by criticizing both Congress and the president and accusing them essentially of bigotry, and saying there was no reason for them to do this other than bigotry. Well, that kind of insult to your co-equal branches of government is really unprecedented, to say that Congress was motivated purely by bigotry towards gays, which there were no facts that were presented.
It was on Doma, but don't you think that what was clearly at play was then under the Bush administration, they attempted to pass the marriage amendment, or they intended to pass the marriage amendment to the Constitution, which would lock the door forever and enforce, in essence, heterosexual marriage. So there was a sentiment at play, even if it wasn't written into Doma, to formalize through government really not just a civil but a religious viewpoint on marriage. To head off a developing gay...
Well, where you and I disagree is that the commitment
Neither one
to
of us are
marriage,
pro-gay per se.
the commitment to marriage as a man and a woman is primarily or exclusively a religious sentiment.
Absolutely. It's not, it shouldn't be under the state.
Well, no, I'm saying it's not based on religion. Marriage as a man and a woman is a matter of historical fact throughout every civilization, regardless of religion. And so it's not to say that it's religious.
I wrote an editorial recently where I pointed out what we're getting into now, but I have not yet heard any discussion about the cultural and social implications of this massive shift in how our society is seeing marriage. It's unprecedented.
Well, we're going to get there.
As you say, every society, even those that were fairly indulgent to the moral arrangement, and famously Greece and Rome, but they never formally put the state and the society behind such aberrations.
Right.
They just indulged it.
Exactly.
But now we're trying to make it a social norm. And
well, and the implications
so
are
that's not a religious
huge.
thing per se.
All right.
No.
But
But I don't like the idea, which is abroad, and as you know, in other programs we've spoken about it from other angles, the idea of certain religious factions that to uphold their religious viewpoint we will use the state, in this case a law that they intended on the marriage amendment, to in essence formalize our religious viewpoint on marriage.
Well, see, I disagree that laws that address marriage as a man and a woman are formalizing a religious viewpoint.
Not narrowly speaking, but why they were doing it was.
Well, I disagree. But that's that is the way that the courts have denigrated, for example, Proposition 8. California, California amended, we amended our Constitution by 57% to 41% vote. By a large majority, we chose in California to retain the traditional definition of marriage as a man and a woman. That was upheld by the California Supreme Court. The federal courts denigrated that constitutional amendment as the product of religious bigotry. And the U.S. Supreme Court, in an unprecedented feat of hypocrisy, said on the one hand, in the Doma case, we respect the state's rights to define marriage, and when California defines marriage, when we define marriage, they find a way to nullify it.
Yeah.
So the hypocrisy is palpable.
Yeah, you're right. They've shown their hand a little.
Well, but the thing that they have not done, which may come as a surprise, they have not actually placed same-sex marriage on a constitutional footing.
No.
They haven't said that the Constitution permits or requires same-sex marriage.
And
they actually fell short of that.
And neither did they in the Lawrence case in Texas.
Right.
And which really empowered the whole gay marriage movement. So I think part of this, we've got problematic legal dynamics at play, but it's not as simple. In fact, it's wrong to say that the Supreme Court in this case is their agenda is to empower gay marriage. I don't think so. I think they're caught, and their ideological biases are tripping them up. And as you said elsewhere, there's not an inherent sympathy to personal religious moral choice anymore. They might be sympathetic to religious institutions, but they're ready to ride roughshod over things. But I think they've got another goal in sight, and we'll talk about it in another program. I think there's growing power of the judiciary, growing power of all forms of government, where it thinks that it's the arbiter and we're going to be dictated to, rather than leaving it up either to the state or to the individual.
I think that the Supreme Court was reminded of what happened when they ruled in Roe versus Wade and announced a new legal regime when it comes to abortion. And it deprived the states of the opportunity to be the crucible to work out the policies and the laws dealing with abortion. Now, of course, there's been lots of legislation and litigation since Roe versus Wade. I think the court wanted to avoid being the final arbiter of the subject of same-sex marriage and leaving it to the states, and yet they did it in an insidious way that nullified the vote of the people in California and effectively denied us the benefits of a Republican form of government. Because initially, the sovereignty is supposed to reside in the people, and when we choose to amend our own Constitution, that should be legitimate.
Yes. I mean, at the same time, we need to remind our viewers of the principle of the United States with representative government. It's not majoritarian rule, so just because
Well, but the court stopped short of saying that Prop 8 if they'd said Prop 8 violates the rights of same-sex couples to marriage, then they would have had a basis for restricting the majority decision as far as marriage. They were unwilling to say that. Now, maybe that's what they were really getting at. And in an earlier case, the California courts did say that same-sex couples have the same right to marry as heterosexual couples, and I think that in that decision, they were ignoring something very basic. What is the definition of marriage?
Right.
Same-sex, homosexuals have always had the right to marry somebody of the other sex if they want to, but they may choose not to.
And the state has long recognized certain legal rights of cohabitation, not with gays, but it's not necessary to have a marriage contract, either civil or religious, for certain rights coming to just the long-term relationship, right?
Well, that's true. I mean, but common law marriage is a rarity. It's in some states. But even in California, where we don't recognize common law marriage, we have the Marvin case where we do recognize that you have economic rights that pertain to a long-term relationship.
A de facto situation creates certain obligations.
Correct.
But explain for our viewers, though, why did the Supreme Court deny standing in the case of Proposition?
Well,
it's not really even clear to me. I think
I'm not sure. I think it was a result looking for a rationale.
Yeah, I think it's a very weak argument.
The Attorney General
pulled that lately against the Freedom from Religion Foundation, which is very correct there, I think, because they're an uninvolved party butting in and something just to drive religion out.
First of all, we need not to lose our listening audience. Standing is a legal term of art.
Yes, thank you for explaining.
And we better not make any assumptions.
Well, in other words, right to bring the suit, not a directly involved party, right?
Well, the standing is a legal concept that asks whether the person who's a party to the case has a legitimate right to be there. Now, in California, the Attorney General, the governor, they forsook their oath of office, sworn to uphold and defend the Constitution both of the United States and the state of California. They refused to defend the Constitution, which had been amended to define marriage as a man and a woman. So who steps in to defend Proposition 8, the Constitution of the state of California, but those who had promoted it? And the court said that those who were the representatives supportive of it, they did not have the kind of interest that warranted being able to defend it in court. Now, the California Supreme Court had said these people do have the right to defend it, but the court didn't care.
Interesting case. We'll discuss this further when we come back after a short. Welcome back. Before the break, I was talking with guest attorney Allen Reinach about the Doma case and the Proposition 8 determination by the Supreme Court recently. Both of them really bearing on the same topic, same-sex marriage. What are some of the implications of well, not just of their decision, of the whole process, gay marriage? Why are religious people so worried about it? I mean, the world is full of, civil society is full of all sorts of activities that are biblically abhorrent and that we would decry, even though we have to charitably relate to all people and recognize their fellow creatures, right? We can't condemn other people per se.
As we look at the subject of the implications, I want to start with a basic premise, and that is that if we respect the rights of conscience, then we have to work for a social and a legal system where everyone has a right of self-determination, that we can live according to our own values, our own beliefs. The problem is where we're going as a result of the growth of gay rights and same-sex marriage in particular.
It's a right
where we are going,
used against religious belief and practice.
we're going to a place where traditional religions and their values and teachings about human sexuality become illegal and unacceptable,
Hate
and
language.
our institutions are not permitted to exist if we're going to continue with those values. Now, I'll give you a simple illustration of how this plays out in a bill that, as we speak, is expected to be voted by the California legislature and may well be signed into law. The Boy Scouts, that great un-American bastion of discrimination. I'm being
Ironic.
sarcastic, okay? The Boy Scouts have been targeted by the gay community for a long time.
Well, they were one of the first organizations to make public statements on their attitude toward gays.
Okay.
Well, it was about 10 years ago.
So there is an exemption in the law for what's called excise taxes on the sale of the intermittent sale, the occasional sale of goods for fundraising. Think the Girl Scout cookies, or think the PTA or the Home and School. They bring they go to Costco, they buy a bunch of drinks and chips and snacks, and they sell it at the high school football game to raise some money for uniforms, okay? Mm-hmm. Now, mind you, they've already paid tax when they bought the stuff, but they are exempt as a nonprofit, as a youth group. They're exempt from paying sales taxes on the resale of this stuff to raise money. So the bill in California would revoke the tax exemption of all of these youth groups unless they submit to the taxing authority a non-discrimination statement and policy that complies with state law. And that means that they're not allowed to discriminate on the basis of religion or the basis of sexual orientation. It is thought police stuff. Yeah. So unless these organizations, including religious schools that have sports teams, or churches that have youth groups, unless we submit to the thought police, then arguably they're going to start trying to collect sales taxes. Now, are they really going to be able to collect sales taxes? I don't think so.
Well, even if they do, in itself, that's not going to destroy the Boy Scouts.
As a practical matter, this is a shot across the bow. Yeah. It's not a real threat. It is an ideological threat to use the taxing authority to punish any groups that adhere to traditional religious values of human sexuality. And I say religious, not Christian, because the same holds in Judaism, the same holds in Islam, and I don't know other religions, but traditionally, human sexuality has been regarded across religions as restricted to a man and a woman.
Yeah, well, it's sort of Darwinian, the survival of the species.
Well, but this gets to, the thing that nobody's really talking about, is there is a very sound secular reason for society and its laws to prefer heterosexual relationships over same-sex relationships. Yeah. It is the survival.
Yes, so it's not illogical.
Unless you want to join with those who are interested in shrinking the human species from 7 billion to 4 billion.
That's what I said in this editorial, well, not in the editorial, on an online blog. I believe the implications to this social and legal change will be as great as the population shifts and all that flowed from that in the Industrial Revolution.
Well,
which led to women working, children, child labor for a while and so on. Huge things came from that.
Now this issue, going back, this issue of tax policy. There was a case in New Jersey involving a Methodist camp along the Jersey shore They were punished because they refused to allow an outdoor pavilion that was used for religious services. They refused to allow a same-sex couple to conduct a commitment ceremony there, and the tax-exempt status of that real property was revoked as a result, and they've been prosecuted in the New Jersey Human Rights Organization, and this case has been ongoing. I haven't heard any future developments in quite some time. There's no question that tax policy is at the forefront of the war against traditional marriage.
And I'd never really thought it through, even until we were discussing it now, that even though I knew the Boy Scouts was really one of the opening salvos, churches, I think it's easier to argue for an exemption because of the deeply held religious, moral stance, and there are separation of church and state. But an organization, the Boy Scouts are not religious in any shape, form, or manner. I mean, it was Baden-Powell, an ex-military man, set it up. He was just exemplifying the moral mores and the social idealism of training young people.
Except an awful lot of Boy Scout troops are connected to churches.
Oh, yes. But I'm just saying, it's not like our Seventh-day Adventist Church. We have Pathfinders, which is structurally modeled after it, but it's tied up to a church organization. Boy Scouts are sort of out there by themselves, and you know, even I always think contrarily. So you could easily make a model that they're in the general marketplace and they're generally applicable social laws. It's going to be a hard battle for them to resist this, even though there are practical reasons why they are taking the stance they are.
You say the implications are going to be enormous, and I absolutely agree. What we're seeing, and I'm going to do big picture. I started with a specific tax policy, but let me back up to do a big picture. In California law, the status of homosexuals has achieved the same legal status as race. Okay, and increasingly, throughout the country, we are legally equating the rights of homosexuals to be free of discrimination with the right to be free of racial discrimination.
It's a good point, because I think that's the poison pill of this whole legal thing. I mean, I have a bit of, before I get hate mail or whatever, you know, I'm a Seventh-day Adventist Christian. I believe in the Bible, and I think this is a moral failing of our modern society. I'm not in favor of homosexuality, but we can't use our Christianity to act badly toward anybody that differs from us, and we need to be careful how we relate to them. So in that regard, I have no sympathy for some religionists that, like, you know, we had an article in Liberty, people at military funerals, you know, shouting hate stuff because of the... I mean, we can't do that, but by the same token, we need to stand on our rights to defend our faith and to practice. And when this is used against us, we've got a conflict just looming huge.
I think we need to be very clear and very public that our protection of religious liberty, we do not believe, comes at the expense of the rights of homosexuals.
We need to make clear. It shouldn't be...
look, the gospel,
you know, a zero-sum game.
Jesus didn't die just for straight people, okay?
Right.
Let's, you know, put the cards on the table. Jesus died for everybody, and we're all sinners, and we're not, you know, if we're heterosexual, that doesn't make us morally superior to homosexuals. We need to be very clear, because anyone these days who is a believer in heterosexual marriage is being accused of being homophobic, of being essentially racist.
Absolutely. Any good Christian, Bible-believing Christian needs to have charity toward all other people. But this argument exists on a social and legal level that we can't ignore.
Well, and the real threat for religious freedom when it comes to the conflict with gay rights is not so much the individual rights as it is the institutional rights of church institutions. For example, Catholic adoption agencies in Boston, in Illinois, in San Francisco have been forced to close their doors because they could not comply with the regulations that required them to offer services to same-sex couples. And their services were not welcome unless they would conform. And we're going to see more and more of this, where religious institutions that will not espouse a policy that includes same-sex couples are simply ruled out of order and forced to close, shut down, put out of business. It remains to be seen how this is going to be implemented, but the implications are quite serious.
Marriage is an institution established by God in Eden for man. It's worth remembering today in discussions of the Defense of Marriage Act and other actions that none of this can affect what God has established as a religious institution. For Liberty Insider, this is Lincoln Steed.